Check. All right, and we're rolling, Vinny. So I'm going to give it the little intro, and we'll get going. Okay, man?
Tight, thanks.
Cool, man. Just give me a mic check one more time.
Yeah. Hey. What's up?
All right. I just want to. I think you're coming in a little bit
good.
low there.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more, man? Second. I just want to raise your volume up.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Hey.
I think we're good now, man.
Sounding okay?
Yeah, that's better, man.
All right, cool.
We're good. This is Big Will from Heavy Hole Podcast, and I'm here with Vinnie Tweten, drummer of Phobophilic from Fargo, North Dakota. Did I get that right, sir?
Nailed it. Hell yeah. What's up, man?
Not much, man. Pleasure to have you here on the Heavy Hole Podcast. And as we were talking before, you're somewhat familiar with the format. I know a little bit. I got to shout out my research, Devoured Death Zine from Australia, which you guys were kind enough to put some shots of the actual. It's like a print zine, I guess, and you guys made it digital for everybody. That was great. Ken's Death Metal Crypt, and of course Metal Archives. So as we get going, I might shout a little bit of that stuff, but to the typical Heavy Hole question. Are you from a musical family, musicians older than yourself and your family, or just anyone in general who steered you into playing any instrument or into hard rock and heavy metal music?
Yeah, definitely. My family, I mean, in the Midwest, most families are pretty religious and whatnot. So I definitely grew up in a church setting. My dad plays the pipe organ, and he's an incredible multi-instrumentalist. And so it was kind of put in me and my siblings at a young age that we should learn instruments and be a part of that. I never really played in the church, but I just from a young age was picking up instruments and trying to play for better or worse. Mostly started with piano, and then I was man, piano's lame. I want to play the drums. And nothing else really clicked. Tried playing guitar, fucking hated it. Made no sense to my little brain. I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. Yeah.
All right, man. So now, growing up in an environment like that, was rock and roll and heavy metal frowned upon or seen as taboo in some way?
Yeah, maybe a bit. I definitely don't think I'm blessed that my parents have always been really supportive of music in any fashion, but they definitely don't really get what we're doing, but they're still cheerleaders about it, so that's tight. But I definitely when I was starting to get into heavier stuff, I also went to this almost all of my cousins. I have a pretty big family, extended family. Both my siblings graduated from this local private school, Christian private school, and I'm kind of the black sheep that didn't quite make it through all of school there. There were some, allegedly there were some problems with me at the school, and for better or worse, I got kicked out, and yeah, I mean, shit happens.
Okay, man. Well, we've heard a lot of stories like that. I'm in some ways the black sheep of my own family, or my family's the black sheep of a larger family. It's complicated, but we all have a situation like that, I think. And also relating to your background, I know the band is based out of Fargo, North Dakota. Is that where you're from?
Yeah. Yep. Born and raised. I've been in the Fargo Moorhead area all my life.
Okay, man. And what's funny is that I hadn't when I reached out to Phobophilic to request an interview, I didn't realize you guys were from Fargo, North Dakota at that moment, because we just recently interviewed Garrett Alvarado from Mall. Just to be clear with the listeners, we're not trying to move in on Fargo, North Dakota, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of because it's not necessarily a region everyone associates with death metal yet. Maybe it will be. I don't know, but with this kind of newer generation of death metal becoming more popular, have you seen death metal in general in your region becoming a big thing?
I would say maybe, yeah, like and the local scene used to be more geared towards like punk and hardcore, and it's kind of moved in a path over the last like I don't know, maybe like last 5 or 10 years, where some of the bands that were around here, like every band that was playing the shows were kind of like hardcore punk, and now it's like we kind of have a newer wave of metal in the city too. There's definitely like a cool resurgence of it and a lot of support in the area.
All right, man. And I know you. This is why I was talking about the research before. I know from an older interview that you and some of the other members went to high school together or knew each other from when you were younger.
Yeah, definitely. Like we were all involved in the local like hardcore punk scene, and I started going to shows around here like when I was like 13, and I met all these guys because, in particular, Josh and Christian in the band, guitar and bass player. Josh was in like a metal band when I first started going to shows, So I met those guys real young, and we've been in like a series of bands together over the past like 10, 11, 12 years. So yeah, we've kind of just been like a tight-knit group.
Okay, and we've heard stories like that in the past, and I know bands like that. I know local people who we just interviewed a young bunch of guys, Raid, from here on Long Island. People who kind of play in a band through high school as they grow up together, and then they kind of settle into a sound and a band that they start playing shows with and that sort of thing. Something I think that I don't believe it was you who did the interview in this the Australian zine, but something they said is that. You were kind of, death metal was kind of like new to you guys as you started the band or in the early stages of the band. So you were really like getting your chops in death metal to begin with, which is understandable considering the age you guys are at. So what I'm really getting at is what were your influences going into it, and what sort of a music scene would you say you guys grew up in or were involved in maybe before you settled on this sound?
Yeah. I mean, definitely like, I've like drummed in a number of bands in the area and just kind of like will help people with their projects and stuff. And it's always kind of like a hardcore punk sort of deal, but that's not really like quite my bag. Like even when I was drumming in hardcore and punk bands, like it was a lot of fun, but it was just like I mostly did that because that's what I could do. That's like what I was familiar with and like who wanted to play. Like that's what they wanted to play. But even when we were like, the full Phobophilic unit, like we were in bands together before that were like hardcore punk. And even when we were doing that, there was like a tinge of like metal to it. We were like hardcore kids that loved like Death and Morbid Angel, So we'd like kind of imbue whatever we were playing with a little bit of that type of feel, if that makes sense. We just didn't really know how to do it super well. Like when we kind of decided like, oh, let's make a death metal band, we weren't really like, let's make a death metal band like this or like that. We were kind of just trying to figure out what to do and what our sound should be, trying to like hit our stride. And it kind of took a while. Like we started out in like 2016 in this band. But I would say, yeah, like the first couple things we did, they're like fine, but it's not really what I would like people to associate us with. It's like this album we're about to put out is definitely like, I feel like it's us finding our sound and like honing in on it.
And that's Enveloping Absurdity, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What label?
Prosthetic.
Prosthetic Records, that's right.
Yep.
Which is, it's a big deal, and I like it, like everything you just said. I don't want to jump ahead and skip your older material at all, but that kind of like leads me right into segue with Enveloping Absurdity. You guys were kind enough to let me preview it, and it sounds like you definitely hit a stride. And when you say like you were maybe playing for hardcore and punk bands, but that wasn't your bag, I hear something a little more technical and a little more depth at work in the composition on this album. You guys really like hit upon something. Through my years, I hear a lot maybe of those like old school European death metal influences coming in that maybe not the not so common ones and things like that. We could get into that. Do you feel that at this point you guys have reached something of a precipice, or like a at least maybe like a new era of the band, or closed the door on an old era of the band? Because this definitely sounds like you've honed in on a sound.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say maybe in like a few areas we've done that, because musically we've always been trying to like push ourselves and push like the boundaries of what we could play. Like kind of something we've always done is when we're in the process of writing songs, we kind of write beyond our ability. Like I'll be trying to write these drum parts and I will fucking like be struggling with them so hard, like they'll like kick my ass, and I can't really, like it's a bit out of my out of my skill set, but I want to do it and I want to just keep getting better. So I just, I write it like that, and then I either have to figure out how to do it or like I'll fuck up, so.
So you mentioned before Morbid Angel and some of the more common death metal influences, I'm sure, creeping in as you guys are exploring music. Before you started the band, or maybe at the beginning of this band, you said the goal wasn't to sound like any, it was to be like a death metal band the way you guys would do it, right? So you're exploring, trying to find your sound. What I got here, I know you did the undimensioned entities, which was Rotted Life and Blood Harvest in 2019. That was kind of like your first real studio recording with the band?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I still definitely like proud of that, but I think that, the album is definitely like leaps and bounds. Like we've pushed a lot more. It's much better musically, and like I feel like we've kind of shed the lyrical theme too, because on that it was very like like Lovecraftian cosmic horror stuff, and on this album it's more like existentialism, like real world lived experience, like just kind of dark real shit.
Yeah, I joke around on the podcast about the Lovecraftian. So I listen to and have in my own collection plenty of bands that have that as their lyrical content. But there is no lack of it if that's what you're into, for sure.
Right.
Right. And I did write down some notes here. Your newer lyrical material references authors. Correct my pronunciation. Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Nietzsche. Yeah.
That's definitely like, those are three of the really big ones that I've like read a lot of their work and I'm really inspired by.
Okay, there's a lot right there. Obviously, I've spoken on the podcast before about how I aspire to be more well read, but I'm more of a layman in these type of things. Maybe break down a little bit in the context of what you actually strained through all of that to really matter to the band and to this album in particular. Like maybe just lay out a few themes that you got from those authors.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I guess so. Like each song on the album is a little different on what it's touching on. Like each song in particular kind of is like directly inspired by like a book that that I've read that inspired it. But if I had to kind of pick at like a few things, it's definitely just this with like in particular like French existentialism, like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, and the other great one, Simone de Beauvoir. It's very much this idea that we are just like thrust into this life, and there's no real like apparent meaning. Like, you weren't born, and there wasn't like something set aside for you. There wasn't like a purpose, that you were just meant to fit this mold and do just that. It's very much the idea that there is no inherent meaning, and that with that there's like a few approaches. Like you could look at that and be like, wow, that's fucking depressing. Like nothing means anything. Like why should I even bother? Or you could look at it and be like, oh, that's so freeing. Like nothing matters. Like, so if I want something to matter, I need to give it meaning. I need to find the meaning in it,
You're becoming the author of your own ambitions. in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. You're the master of your own reality, you know?
That's a very broad theme that some people who even profess to be Satanists in some schools of Satanism, I think would attest to that. I mean, there's a lot of different religions could probably find some way to wrap meaning to that. It's a broad theme, but these authors that you've mentioned in particular, now just for the listeners, we always recommend music as we go along. Maybe just broad strokes. What are two or three books that have in particular inspired you in terms of this album?
Yeah, of course. In particular, like a few of the big ones that like directly influence a few of the songs. For instance, would be by Albert Camus. Like my favorite books by him would be The Stranger, and it's not like a really technical, like jargony book. Like this is like a fictional book he wrote, and it's like through the eyes of the main character, and his mother just died, and he's just going through the motions, but the way that he reacts to everything you'll read it and you'll be like, why are they acting so strange? Like it doesn't sound like the way a human being would react. He's acting in a way that's so like morally ambiguous. It's not like the way he's reacting isn't like good or bad. He just is like so like withdrawn from like the human experience, and it's just a really interesting read because it's really hard to connect with the main character in it, but it still is like really compelling. So that's one. Another one would be Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, which like directly inspires the third song on our album, Nauseating Despair, which is like kind of where the title comes from. That's a great one too. Kind of the same thing. Like a lot of Sartre's stuff is like it's too jargony, it's too like over my head, and I'm definitely like no expert in these types of things. I find it really interesting and I like it a lot, but I'm always trying to learn more about it. And so that book is his more like fictional, like you're in the driver's seat of it, and it's just kind of about like a startling realization and like having this just existential dread, and you're just like realizing something that you'll never be able to see in a different way. Like you just see it and then it's too late, you know? Yeah.
All right. Heavy stuff. And one more quickly. How about let's recommend something by Nietzsche.
Yeah. Okay. I really like. So in particular, like I think it's the last book that he wrote, but from our song Cathedrals of Blood, in parentheses it says Twilight of the Idols, because he has a book that's called, oh my God, what's it called? It's called like Twilight of the Idols, but there's another part to it. I think it's Antichrist so I think the book is called Antichrist / Twilight of the Idols. And that's like why I put the parentheses in that song for that.
All right. I appreciate that, because we try to recommend things, and this is territory. We don't always go the more literary route.
Yeah, for sure.
So a lot behind this album, and getting back to some of the more sonic elements and recent developments. Also, the song you just mentioned, Nauseating Despair, that's the one that you guys have a music video for that Decibel recently premiered.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the video. I know that the director was somebody, a Killjoy. Is that the name?
So his name's Sam Clays, and he's done like video work for. I might be saying this wrong because I'm realizing now I've never said it out loud. I've only read it, but I think it's Unartig, and they are like a video collective. But he's just like a homie that we've known forever, and he's like a great videographer, and we finally got to like connect with him on a project, and we filmed that in the basement of like this cider bar that I work at. It's just filmed in a closet that we just pulled all the like cans and equipment out of, and we just like set up and played in there. Okay,
that's fun, man. I gotta ask, is cider are you drinking a cider right now?
I'm drinking a cider right now.
I was gonna, because shout to Garrett from Mall. He was drinking a cider when I interviewed him. Is that a particularly big thing out there in Fargo, North Dakota?
You know, not to take credit for it, but I do encourage all my homies to come hang out at the cider bar I work at. It's the one cider bar in town. It's called Wild Terra. It's very tight, lots of plants. They don't like when I play death metal, but you know, sometimes it's gotta happen.
All right, man. Cider. Maybe that's something we got to explore more on the podcast. Get endorsed by some cider guy.
Hey, I'll send you something.
All right, man. Yeah. I wasn't even fishing right there, man. Shout to Justin. Well, the Decibel premiered the video. I encourage everyone, especially now that we know a little bit more behind the song, you can check that out because the album hasn't dropped yet. It's dropping very soon, right?
Yeah, on Friday, the 16th, it drops.
Friday. So you will probably have this timed out where that the episode will be up when people are buying the album or have the ability to buy the album. So, yeah, if the early bird listeners are listening to this as it's going on. Now, you guys did something. There's a lot going on. We touched on the lyrics and how this album is maybe shows, I would say, some progression and growth for the band in terms of composition and writing. There's been a lot happening through the last year or two with you guys since things have opened up. I wrote down a few things that I know seem pretty big to me. You got that Death Nexus Fest in Philly, the East Coast Tour, LDB Fest in Kentucky, which looked like it was crazy.
Yeah, that was fun.
And you know, Ken's Death Metal Crypt, Ken's Crypt Fest, you know, the online thing was cool. The one thing I really wanted to ask you, though, about a year ago, last September, you guys did the tour with Gatecreeper, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That seems like a real big look. Gatecreeper seems like a big band.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, like, we had no idea that we were on their radar. And so, like, when the email came through and they were like, hey, you want to drive to New Mexico, play a couple gigs with us? We were like, fuck yeah. And so we're just, you know, we live in, like, the middle of nowhere. So we're just, like, when people hit us up to do cool shit, we're just ready to get in the van and just drive out there, you know? Like, we're so central in the country, pretty much. Like, if anybody's like, hey, come to Florida, come to Cali, like, we'll do it. We're crazy. We're just trying to get out there and tour. So it just, like, worked out well. And yeah, those guys are, like, the biggest sweethearts and, like, really, like, took us under their wing and helped us a lot. And it was really sick.
Were those, like, had you played for audiences that big at that point and venues maybe that capacity at that point, or was that like a bigger step into the music field?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, especially because our first show back after, like, shutdowns and stuff was, like, at Sister Bar in New Mexico, and we'd, like, you know, we'd never been to New Mexico, and it was just, like, crazy. It was a packed room. Like, those were definitely some of the, like, biggest venues and crowds we'd ever played at that point. So it was like a little scary, but it was really fun and just really exciting. Like, just getting back into it. I mean, I'm sure you know what I mean. Like, yeah, it's cool.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that seems like it probably would have been a real exciting tour. Gatecreeper really doing big things. You know, obviously not just lately, but the last several years. I feel like that, you know, they're kind of on that trajectory of, like, you know, your cattle decapitations and your, you know, rest in peace, your Black Dahlia murders, your Cannibal Corpse. You know, they could, you know, if they keep hanging there a few more years, they'll be up there with those guys.
Agreed. Yeah. And
now, I mentioned a few of these fests. You kind of, like, mentioned, you mentioned you guys are kind of, like, centrally located in terms of your region. Everyone's willing to jump in the van and play a show because Kentucky, Philly, East Coast. It definitely seems like you guys got around the last year or so.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we're just hoping to do it even more now. You know, especially, like, with the album coming out, we'll definitely be hitting some tours. But yeah, the, like, LDB was tight. Cause it's funny because that's, like, when we were in, like, hardcore and punk bands. You know, we're, like, very familiar with all those bands, like Zobalba and, like, Incendiary and stuff. Like, I love those bands. I've seen them before, and, like, it just was cool to get asked to play that. But it was just kind of funny because we used to be in hardcore and punk bands, and we always, like, wanted to play that fest. And now here we are, like, in this death metal band, and we get asked to play, and it's just so funny to see us, like if you watch any of the videos, it's us, like, playing guitar solos and, like these really slow, like, kind of doom death, like, outros to songs, and then people are still just, like, fucking moshing and going crazy, and it's just the funniest thing to me to see people, like, hardcore dancing and, like, stage diving during, like, really melodic guitar solos. It's just hilarious. I love it.
Well, that's something I wanted to ask you about that LDB Fest, because it did seem like a big hardcore thing with a few death metal bands and whatever, but does it matter nowadays? It seems like the climate of the scene nowadays, especially with the younger generation taking hold right now, is that it really doesn't matter as long as it hits between hardcore and death metal and all the other subgenres in between.
Yeah, and I mean, I would agree. Like, as much as I always kind of was, like, like, I kind of grew up a hardcore kid, like, I really was, like, looking to death metal bands for, like, inspiration, and, like, that's more what I was into. But I feel like nowadays, especially, there's so many bands that do a great job of kind of crossing over and being, like, like a hardcore person or, like, a death metal person can just, like, understand it either way. And there's a lot of bands that just do a good job of bridging the gap and introducing, like, new fans to different types of music. And yeah, I'm not usually into, like, a lot of the kind of, like, hardcore death metal bands, but, like, I have infinite respect for it, like, I think it's cool as fuck.
There's so much music nowadays that it's hard for me to even filter things through, but I know what you mean, man. I do have a respect for the scene coming up nowadays, and I definitely try not to be like that kind of jaded, bitter old guy, because I'm a little bit older than you guys. But I try to keep an open mind to it too, because there's, for all the millions of bands that maybe don't have as much imagination, there's always some really cool bands that push it forward, regardless of the wave, and whatever the hype is that's going on. Now, before I get ahead of myself, we were talking about you guys kind of get out there on the road. Do you have a van? Do you own a van, or do you guys rent a van, or what's up?
Yeah, we own a van. We were fortunate to get, like, this old, like, it was like a church van that had, like, no miles on it.
Sweet.
Like, they must have just used it to, like, pick up blue-haired ladies once a week and drive them a mile to the church. Like, so we got, like, a great deal on a van. We're, like, I mean, not me, because I know literally nothing about cars, but the other fellas are good at keeping it upkept.
Nice.
And yeah, we're just trying to hit the van world tour anytime.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I wish you the best of luck, man. Most of my bands we've rented sporadically, but we also, we've done some Road Warrior shit here and there, but
Hell yeah.
Like the people I know who own vans, you really got to get out there and make it worth it, man. It seems like you guys are doing just that. And the new album, Enveloping Absurdity, a Prosthetic Records, coming out probably today, if you're listening to this the day the episode drops, the 16th of September. We just talked about all this stuff you're doing on the road, big festivals you're playing, touring with Gate Creeper, maybe exposing yourself to bigger audiences. Does any of that factor in, and how does it factor into the writing process, and to the thought process, and the mentality on the new album?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess we did, like, we started a few of these songs, like, before the pandemic hit, and throughout the pandemic, that's when we really, like, ironed them out and finished them and recorded them. So all these opportunities that came with like the easing up of restrictions, by that point we had already, like, finished the album, but I'm sure that those experiences will kind of help us towards the, like, the next material. So yeah.
Okay, it's interesting to get some insight. I think also in some ways it makes a band tighter, just as musicians, and it kind of aligns everybody. Sometimes if you're on the road a lot together and you're playing a lot more live shows prior to getting in the studio. And something else about the writing process, the recording process. You tell me, this wasn't your first time working with Adam Tucker at Signature Tone Recordings in Minneapolis, was it?
Right. Yeah. So we recorded Undimensioned Identities, the EP, with him, and then we also recorded the split song that we did, Bottom Up Creation. We did a split with Canada's Sedimentum, which they also have a new record that is like fucking incredible. So definitely check those fellows out if you haven't. But yeah. So now that's like a few releases we have with him, and honestly, like he's great and like totally understands what we are just going for. And you know, like on the album we didn't like, yeah, he's just so good at capturing like the live sound, which is very important to us as a band, because I believe strongly in like the drummer is the click. I don't like to I practice to a click, like rudiments and shit, but like as far as recording goes, like I don't want to record the song to a click, you know? I want it to feel like it's live, or feel like more organic. I don't like that. I also don't really like sampling stuff out, and like I don't know, call me old fashioned, but I like when drums sound like drums, you know? So that's kind of like something that he really champions too. And you know, it's just been so fluid. Like we're all on the same page, and he's super helpful with like any ideas, or like, you know, there would be times in the studio where I'd be trying to play this part and he'd be like, you know what, Vinny, like, why don't you just play something simpler? Like, you're not going to nail this. So he just like, you know, like keeps it real with you, which I appreciate that kind of input, you know? Yeah.
All right. And he played some synthesizer parts on this latest album. I got it right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just speaking of kind of like the added depth, I think, in the songwriting nowadays with some of this stuff that you guys. And what I was saying before, I mentioned kind of like old school European bands. I mean, to just put it out there on the table, I hear a little bit of some of the classic Finnish bands that I love so much, Adramalek and Demolich. And some of the riffing styles and some of the rhythms, some of the choices you guys make. Let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, first of all, is that a factor? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say.
I mean, it's in the blender.
We love it.
Yeah, everyone's imagination. And
so good.
You guys are a little bit younger than me. Take me through your journey with that, because you know, you guys obviously, everyone gets into Morbid Angel and Death and some of those bands that are bigger. Over the years, though, take me down the wormhole you guys go through. What are some of the other bands and some of the other scenes that are really important to you guys as Phobophilic?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and like I said, yeah, you nailed it with the Finnish inspo, because we definitely love that shit. But as far as like death metal stuff goes, like my first introduction was really like the band Death. Like I remember when we were practicing like for our like hardcore band, and Christian, the bass player, he was playing the bass lick from I'm forgetting the name of the song. It's like one of the first couple tracks on The Sound of Perseverance by Death. But I was like, what the fuck are you playing? And then he showed me, and then I just haven't looked back, you know? But yeah, like Death and Cynic, I would say, are like some of the like really important ones. That like Cynic is like my all-time favorite band. I like fucking love that shit. And as far as like, I mean, you know, like Gorguts and like Stargazer and like Crematory, but yeah, like definitely the Finnish stuff, like, and Demigod too, you know, like Demolich, Adramalek, and Demigod. Like we just kind of you know, just fell down the rabbit hole of like finding similar artists, and then realized like, oh, there's such a pocket of like Finnish bands trying so hard to like distinguish themselves from Swedish bands, and like really like cutting their own sound and like doing an incredible job of it. So yeah, that's all those bands like definitely resonate with us like really hard.
Yeah, there's not much more to say about it, really, is that there's just a lot of sick bands from that era. Everyone knows it now, you know, the cat's out of the bag. Yeah. That bit, I read that book, Rotting Ways to Misery, The History of Finnish Death Metal. It's a great book, highly recommended to you and to anyone listening to this. Just to get a really good picture on how there's whatever Finnish bands you're into, there's more that you never even like. It's just crazy, man. And
I bet.
A lot of them were so original in what they did and still are. So and then now pushing past that, we talked a lot about the album, which is dropping today, 9/16. If you're listening to this in time. Are you guys? I didn't notice any upcoming shows. Are you guys doing any record release shows? Anything you want to plug? For people who are in the area or might be in the area.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're still like kind of looking to organize that. We're trying to figure out like a lineup and what to do for that. We don't have anything booked right at the moment. We do have like allegedly a big like tentative tour that I can't say too much about. I'm sorry to say, because we're just the little boys on the bill, and we're waiting for the fellas to give us the green light. But it's gonna be sick, is all I can say.
That's a good place to be in, man. We're gonna tell the listeners to keep their eyes on your social media. And you mentioned something that popped into my head before too when you were talking about Death and Cynic. That would seem to be kind of like a clear influence, maybe lyrically, on the idea of death metal being able to be more of an introspective and more of a like maybe even a socially conscious or philosophical type of music. Not just the gore and guts and demons bands. There's plenty of them and they're great, but there can be a lot of other stuff to it. Is that fair to say about you guys?
No, absolutely. And like you said, like I have no disrespect towards like bands that they aren't really like pushing a message. Like I think that's just as worthwhile and it's fucking cool. But it's just not quite what we wanted to do, And like absolutely, I really love like just kind of the like really interesting poetic stuff that Paul Masvidal does with Cynic. But there's a Chuck Schuldiner interview where he's kind of like talking about. I think he's kind of talking. I'm forgetting which album it like kind of started in. Maybe it was Spiritual Healing or Human, where he was just kind of being like, I realized that I could just write songs about real stuff and it will still be death metal and it's still like fucking brutal because life is fucking brutal and I don't have to like sing about zombie shit and like Satan ritual crap. Like this shit's cool, but it's just as cool to just write about like everyday terrible things that we're all familiar with,
Yeah, there's a lot of different approaches. So what let me ask you this then on that note, what have you been reading lately?
Yeah, actually funny enough, I'm reading this Japanese author. His name's Haruki Murakami. He's fantastic. I'm trying to get through all of his books. Right now I'm reading this book called 1Q84. And he does this thing that's kind of jumping between each chapter is like a different main character. So there's like two main characters and each chapter it flip-flops and all of his stories kind of have a convergence of the two separate stories at some point. Some of them they almost converge, but they don't quite, and you're like, oh shit, I really thought that was gonna happen. And then some of them they just like they link up in such an unlikely, interesting way. And I just really love, in particular, there's just a very like I really appreciate the kind of more Japanese style of approaching like art and literature and even movies and stuff, where it's like, I feel like in American culture, movies are very centered around like the tops of the roller coasters. Like you're hitting these benchmarks, like, oh, this happened. How do we get to the next crazy thing? Oh, there it happened. Whereas like Japanese literature, it's not about the peak. It's not about the ending. It's about the journey. Like you're kind of enjoying it the whole time. It's not so much about the hills and valleys, like, yeah, a lot of the most memorable scenes and the most like enjoyable parts are like, he's just describing like a character cooking his lunch and it just is like, it's just beautiful. I don't know how to put it, but there's also shit that's like, there's like really crazy things that happen too that are, they don't really make a whole lot of sense. It's kind of like David Lynch shit where you're kind of left guessing and you're like, I don't know that I understand what's happening, but I'm having a good time, so that's fine.
All right, man. That sounds pretty interesting, man. That's definitely different, man. I've been trying to
Yeah.
read more. I've been taking the train to work when I can, so I could read a little bit sometimes and save a couple bucks.
Dope.
But all right. So everybody could put that on their reading list along with some of those heavier books from before that we were talking about.
There you go.
And as we wind down, I'll ask you to recommend something that's a little bit more in our wheel, or maybe not in our wheelhouse. Before we close out, I'll definitely give you the opportunity to plug and promote anything with Phobophilic or anything else you got going on.
Yeah.
But before that, can you please recommend for me and for the listeners one older and one newer release by any artist you like, metal or otherwise, demo or EP or anything, whatever you want.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, to stay on this, to stay kind of in the same wave, I'm really obsessed with this album called Sun Shower. It's by Taiko Onuki, so really great Japanese singer. And it came out in 1977. Very kind of city pop jazz, like kind of smooth jazz, like lighter.
Nice. Yeah.
Really, really beautiful stuff. Great stuff to just kind of like drive during like a nice day. You got the windows down. It's beautiful. You'll have a great time.
That's good. That sounds nice, man. Okay. And that's okay. And could you say it one more time?
Yeah, Taiko Onuki. Taiko is Taeko.
Okay, man.
And the album's called Sun Shower.
Okay, the internet will figure it out for everybody, man. That's
yeah,
good.
they got it. They got it.
And then what about your newer recommendation?
Yeah, for newer, I really dig some, like, I've been really into this artist called Callie Malone. I think she's from Sweden, and she does like pipe organ stuff and kind of like synthy, like really like atmospheric, really droning stuff. But she has a new album called Living Torch that I've been really into. That's very just, it's very slow and brooding, but I don't know. I love that kind of shit. It's nice. Yeah.
Okay. And what was
Callie
that?
Malone.
Okay.
Living Torch.
Okay,
Yeah.
man. Interesting. All right. A lot of interesting recommendations. Broaden your horizons. And then, of course, look out for Enveloping Absurdity, which is the new album by Phobophilic of Fargo, North Dakota. It's on Prosthetic Records. Should be out today, the 16th of September, if you're listening to this album in time. If you're listening to this episode in time, if you're listening to this episode in like 3 years, then just go back and buy the album anyway, man. The guys will still need the money at some point, man. Come on. But Vinnie Tweten, drummer of Phobophilic, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, man.
Hey, thank you, Will. The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Any ending notes? Anything to watch out for that I neglected to mention?
No, I mean, I feel like we covered it. I would just say, yeah, just like follow us. We got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, like Phobophilic. I mean, there's not a whole lot of accounts that are using the same name, so we should be easy enough to find. You know. Yeah,
man.
Yeah.
You guys got one of the good ones, man. Thank you very much, man. Any final message for listeners of Phobophilic and listeners to the Heavy Hole podcast?
Be kind to yourself. Drink some water.
Wow.
That's it.
Or cider.
Or cider. Fuck yeah. Thanks again, Will.